And I feel like sometimes it's hard for us to understand why God would allow our plans to be interrupted, because a lot of times they aren't sinful plans. If anything, they're spiritual. We have an invitation when our plans get interrupted to be a part of something far more purposeful and fruitful and far bigger than we could possibly comprehend. And the only thing that can stop us from this is hello and welcome back to my channel. Today's video, we're going to be doing a little Bible study on Philippians 1 that gives us a super encouraging nugget from the story of Paul. If you feel like your plans have been interrupted and you're worried or you just don't know what God is doing, this video is for you. It's going to show us a truth that God will interrupt your plans, but he does so for his purposes. And man, oh man, are his purposes good even when they're hard. Before we get into it, I have some super exciting news. So if you are familiar with my channel and the Bible Study With Me series I do, you might have seen that for my most recent Bible Study With Me series, going through the book of Jonah, I added a few new resources. So I created a study guide, which gives you in-depth, detailed notes of the study that we go through. Also some memory verse lock screens so you can store God's word in your heart as you study. And then a Bible study bundle, which gives you both the study guide, the memory verse lock screen, and then the entire video series in one streamlined, comprehensive video. And these resources have been so helpful. I've heard from so many of you that you love them too. You love having the little guides to go through them. And so my plan is actually to go back and create these resources for all of my existing Bible Study With Me series that I already have here on YouTube. And good news, I just finished creating these resources for my Bible Study With Me series going through the book of Philippians, which was actually the very first Bible Study With Me series I ever did, the one that started it all back in December of 2019, so 4 years ago now. Comment below if you were here when that one got released. If you're interested in doing the Philippians Bible Study With Me series, it is available completely for free here on YouTube. I'll link it above if you want to check it out. And then if you want to grab my Philippians Bible study guide to go along with that study, again, it's a detailed, in-depth study guide that walks you through all of our study notes. If you want to grab that, I'm doing a special launch sale of 25% off for these first 3 days that it is live. And so you can grab it literally just for a few dollars. I'll also have linked down below my Philippians memory verse lock screens so you can just store God's word in your heart as you study through Philippians. And then I'm also doing a special launch sale of 25% off on the Philippians Bible Study With Me bundle, which includes the study guide, the memory verse lock screens, and the entire video series in one streamlined, comprehensive video. So all of those are going to be linked down below. Let me know if you're excited for me to start releasing these resources for all of my existing Bible Study With Me series. And if you are, let me know which one you'd like to see me release next. And if you don't know, I have 10 or 11 actually Bible Study With Me series totally for free here on YouTube. If you're wanting to go through a book of the Bible chapter by chapter, I'll link all the ones I've already released down below. But now let's go ahead and get into today's video. Before we do, if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to my channel. I make Christian faith and lifestyle content aimed at encouraging you to know God more through his word and to grow in his likeness. And I would love to have you here. And then give this video a thumbs up if you find it helpful or encouraging. Let's go ahead and take a look at the passage for today's video. If you have a Bible, you can turn to Philippians chapter 1. I'll also have the text on the screen. We're looking at verses 12 through 14. Here's what it says. I want you to know, brothers, that what has happened to me has really served to advance the gospel so that it has become known throughout the whole imperial guard and to all the rest that my imprisonment is for Christ. And most of the brothers, having become confident in the Lord by my imprisonment, are much more bold to speak the word without fear. So here Paul is talking and he says, I want you to know, brothers, that what has happened to me has really served to advance the gospel. What has happened to me? What happened to Paul? We need a little bit of context. So to start, the book of Philippians is a letter that the Apostle Paul wrote to the church at Philippi. And as Paul is writing this letter, he is actually in prison. Most scholars believe that he's in prison in Rome. And what we'll learn as we continue to read through the book of Philippians, if you were to keep reading the next verses, you'll see that Paul doesn't know if he's going to be released from prison to live or if he's going to be put to death. So he is in prison. He is sitting at this crossroads. He doesn't know what's going to happen to him. Yet he's saying that what has happened to me has really served to advance the gospel. So what happened to Paul is that he was thrown into prison. And the question is, what was Paul doing before he was thrown into prison? And the answer is ministry. He was doing ministry. He was traveling the world, preaching the gospel, bringing the gospel first to the Jews and then to the Gentiles. So Paul was doing this good work of ministry, of preaching the gospel, and this good work is interrupted by him being thrown into prison. Yet Paul didn't see it this way. He says, what has happened to me, getting thrown into prison, has actually served to advance the gospel. A note on this passage from the Enduring Word Commentary, my favorite free commentary app, it says, Paul here answered a concern of the Philippians. He wanted them to know that God's blessing and power were still with him, even though he was in prison. He was not out of the will of God, and God's work still continued. So it might have looked like the favor of God wasn't upon him. He was thrown into prison. It might have looked like God's purposes were thwarted, but Paul wanted them to know God's blessing, God's power were still upon him, and he was not outside of the will of God. God was working through exactly what was happening. So even in the interruption of Paul's original plan, God had a good purpose. Let's look again at what that purpose is. Let's read through that passage again. Paul says, I want you to know, brothers, that what has happened to me, it has really served to advance the gospel, so that it has become known throughout the whole imperial guard and to all the rest that my imprisonment is for Christ. And most of the brothers, having become confident in the Lord by my imprisonment, are much more bold to speak the word without fear. So let's pull out here, what are those good purposes? One, Paul says that it has served to advance the gospel because now that Paul is in prison, it's become known to the imperial guard, to all the prison guards, that Paul was imprisoned for Christ. So the gospel is being spread, it is being made known. What other good purposes? He says that the brothers, these other Christians, have gained confidence in the Lord because of Paul's imprisonment, and it has emboldened them in sharing the gospel. So it seems kind of counterintuitive that these other Christians would become more confident and more emboldened by seeing Paul get into prison. They might have thought like, well, if we share the gospel, we might end up in prison too. But seeing Paul's testimony when he is thrown in prison, it actually emboldens their faith that they're able to share the gospel without fear. Another good purpose, not even mentioned in this passage, another good thing to come out of Paul being in prison is literally this passage itself. The book of Philippians, this letter, was written while Paul was in prison. Other epistles or letters of Paul are also written from Paul's prison stays as well. So we have Philippians, this book, but also Ephesians, Colossians, Philemon. These were all written from prison. So Paul wrote a good portion of the New Testament, which is the second half of literally the most popular book in the entire world. The Bible has and still is changing lives. And I just think that Paul, I'm sure, never in his wildest dreams could have imagined the astounding impact and fruitfulness that came from this seeming interruption. And this fruitfulness came because he was willing to surrender. He didn't dig his heels in and say, well, here were my original plans. He kept his eyes open to see how God was working even when his plans got interrupted. And you and I, we have the same invitation when our plans get interrupted as well. If I were Paul, literally traveling the world, preaching the gospel, and I got thrown into prison, it would be really easy for me to feel like my plans were being interrupted and to ask God, why are you interrupting my plans? They're good plans. They're plans for your glory. And I feel like sometimes it's hard for us to understand why God would allow our plans to be interrupted, because a lot of times they aren't sinful plans. If anything, they're spiritual. Yet Isaiah 55 tells us that God's thoughts are not our thoughts and his ways are not our ways. We have an invitation when our plans get interrupted to be a part of something far more purposeful and fruitful and far bigger than we could possibly comprehend. And the only thing that can stop us from this is an unwillingness to surrender. We have to ask ourselves, are we willing to let go of our plans so that God's purposes can be accomplished? I'm going to be honest, I struggle with this. I feel like one of the biggest lessons I've learned in my almost first full year of motherhood is honestly how selfish I can be, how prone I am to want to hold tightly to my own way and how I want things to go, even if it's something as simple as how the day is going to unfold or what our schedule is going to look like. And there's areas where God has definitely grown me in my ability to let go and to surrender. And then there's other areas, other hopes and dreams that I know if He were to interrupt those plans, it would feel a lot harder to let go. And so I'm not speaking from a place of I've got this figured out, of I've got this down, because I know that it is hard, but I also see that there's usually so much more fruitfulness and so much more peace when I'm willing to yield to God's purposes. We see here that Paul didn't need everything to be easy or according to plan in order to be fruitful. In fact, so much more fruitfulness came through things being hard and through things not going according to plan, and the same thing is generally true for us. Another note from the Enduring Word commentary on this passage says, Paul doesn't mention if he was being advanced because he didn't care about that, and he assumed that the Philippians didn't care either. Their common passion was the furtherance of the gospel, and the gospel continued to advance. The question here is, do we care more about our own purposes being advanced or God's purposes being advanced? And are we willing to lay down our plans for God's purposes? I do have an entire video on surrender if you want to dig more into this topic, but I hope that this video and this passage from the story of Paul was an encouraging reminder to you that even if things aren't going according to your plan, God's purpose has not been interrupted and His purpose is good. Remember, if you want to do an in-depth study on the book of Philippians, you can grab my Philippians Bible study guide, my Philippians Bible study bundle, or the Philippians memory verse lock screens, which are free. All of those things are going to be linked down below, and I would love to hear from you in the comments. Share a testimony of a time when your plans were interrupted, but you saw through that God's good purposes. I'm going to be sharing a testimony of my own down in a pinned comment below, and I look forward to reading through yours. Thank you so much for being here, for watching this video, and I will see you in my next one. Bye.